We can go live now to the Commission's hearing for today. And the first to be questioned by the Commission is the Chair of the Electoral Commission, Jean Mensah.
And these gentlemen said to be from the national security. Were you told why they were present?
No, we were not told why they were present, but they were not, I may have to add here that they were ordinarily clothed and they were not armed.
There are reports of persons purported to have come from the national security who were actually armed at some polling stations. Are you aware of that?
Not at all. From the reports we have received from our field officers who were monitoring, there were no armed security personnel at any of the 137 polling stations.
There are also reports of intimidating presence of certain masked men in black and brown uniform who were wielding arms in some of the polling stations. Are you aware?
There were no masked men who were wielding arms in any of the 137 polling stations. All our reports that have come in and the monitors who have monitored, including members of the Commission, did not identify any of these armed masked men at any of the 137 polling stations.
Are you saying that you have actually investigated and you can confirm that
yes,
of a truth there were no masked men at any of the polling stations? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Now, you said you have cited the Kodeo report.
Yes.
That report makes it very clear that there were masked armed men at some polling stations. What do you have to say about that?
I still stand by, the reports we have received that there were no masked armed men at any of the polling stations.
There is also a report about a police officer who was attacked precisely at the prison's JHS by men alleged to be operatives of national security. Has that come to your attention?
Very much so.
And have you investigated that?
We have.
And what is your finding?
Indeed, we've done some extensive investigation. When we received the report from Kodeo, we went ahead to interview our presiding officers in the polling stations located in the prisons in Roman Ridge, and they all confirmed, and we have it in writing, that there was no abuse of a policeman in that polling station. Indeed, they indicated that there was some argument between the policeman and some staff from national security, but there was no physical abuse. We also went ahead to identify or locate all the policemen that were deployed to that police station. And we have their names here. There were 5 policemen. We have their staff numbers. We have their duty stations and their contact telephone numbers. And we can tender that in evidence. And we went on to speak to each and every one of them. And they all indicated there was some disagreement and argument, but there was no physical abuse. Beyond that, we approached the regional commander, who assured us that he was going to investigate. And he's also provided us with a report showing that there was no abuse, physically, no assault on any of the police personnel deployed to the prison's polling station. So we have that here, the letter from the regional commander, and then we have the names also of the policemen who were deployed, their contact telephone numbers and everything.
And
we also have available.
Finished with copies of that?
Yes, please.
Very well. You can go on if you've not finished.
Yes, we also have the report of the presiding officers who were there, and they have all indicated that there was a verbal disagreement but there was no assault, as was being alleged in the Codeo report.
Now, have you also heard, now before that, have you per any chance cited a picture purporting to be this police officer we are talking about with a wound somewhere under his eyes? Have you cited that?
No, we haven't cited that.
Very well, very well. To the best of your knowledge, how many men of the security task force were kept in each polling station?
Well, usually you would find about 3 to 4 policemen, and then you could also find about, in some polling stations you would find about, 3 or 4, staff from the Ghana Immigration Service. And in a few police stations that we went to, not all, maybe 1 or 2 gentlemen who had a T-shirt on and a badge saying National Security, NSC, on the badges.
Now, it is alleged that you had intimidating presence of heavily armed officers at some polling stations. What do you have to say?
That is not true. There were no armed policemen at any of the polling stations. Indeed, I had the opportunity to visit about 15 polling stations in the airport residential area in Jowulu, and there were no armed men at any of the polling stations. The commissioners have also come back to report. They were littered all across the country, and a staff strength of close to 30 monitoring on the field from the start of the polls to the end of the polls, all the way through the collation at the Legon cafeteria. And there were no armed men. Nobody has reported the presence of intimidating armed men at any of the polling stations.
As a follow-up to that, the Codeo report, which you have cited, states that in some polling stations, there were not less than 5 uniformed security personnel, and in some cases, as high as 15. What do you have to say about that?
This means, can you speak a little bit slowly for purposes of the person doing the transcription of the proceedings?
Yes, as I mentioned, I went to a number of polling stations, and you would find 4 policemen and some officers from the immigration. So, this, and then 1 or 2 from national security. But I didn't cite, and I haven't received reports of only policemen, of policemen numbering as high as 15. As high as 15. You would find 4 or 5 police officers, 4 or 5 immigration officers, and 1 or 2 officers from the national security. But in all the polling stations that I visited, I didn't see, 15, police officers, and we haven't received reports to that effect.
Very well. Now, it is widely reported that on the day of the by-election, there was a shooting incident close to one of the polling stations, to be specific, La Bawaleshi Presby School. Has that come to your attention?
Yes, please.
And have you done any investigation into that?
Yes.
And
again,
what is your findings?
Well, of course, the polls began on time in the La Bawaleshi polling station, but we got a report, early in the hours, somewhere around 8:30, that there had been a shooting incident in a home or some residence, which was about 140 meters away from our polling station. what we were informed was that there was a lot of noise, gunshots and so on. And so the people within the community and the neighborhood ran to, our polling station, which was housed in the Presby School, the Labawaleshi Presby School. And so what happened, our officers had to quickly protect, our equipment and our materials there. And it brought, voting there to a halt for close to 45 minutes because a lot of people, took cover there because of the shooting that was quite loud in the neighborhood. So that is the information that we received. It is also important to place on record that the shooting did not occur at the polling station, but occurred about 140 meters away in a residence, near the polling station.
Very well. Now, from every election, I believe lessons are learnt. So, going forward, we have election 2020 ahead of us. Bawaleshi, Ayawaso West Wargon was only a constituency out of many. And these are the reports around the country. What lessons have you learned going forward?
The lessons learned are to really do a lot of public education, to empower the citizens to, inform the appropriate agencies of early warning signs. It's very important to ensure that we are all responsible. On the part of the Electoral Commission also, we would continue to engage with the security and, provide them with the flashpoint areas very early on to ensure that they take, adequate measures. But also, I think it's also important for the parties to disband their vigilante groups. I believe that that is really, if we look at the history and even what has occurred with Ayawaso, it's centering around this sort of thing. If you look at what transpired at the polling station, it was not because of fraud on the part of presiding officers. That didn't lead to any violence. It was not because, of misconduct of any of the presiding officers or election officials. It also did not lead to violence. So it's really, I think we need to, call on our parties to do away with the vigilantism and to call on the citizens also to condemn it. Because I think the peace and the interests of this country is higher and bigger than any political interest or any interest group.
Madam, throughout my questioning, you denied almost all the allegations. Now, in your last answer, you referred to what happened at the polling station. If I may ask, what happened at the polling station?
Which of the polling stations, please?
When you were talking about vigilantism, you said looking at what happened at the polling stations, you could tell that it wasn't as a result of anything your officers might have done.
I think it was a peaceful process, and it was a fair process. It was a credible process, and it was transparent. If you went to the polling stations, voting was very peaceful. The police were there, the security agencies were there, but very seated away from the polling center where the area cordoned for people to come in and vote. They were quite a distance away and really not involved in the, they were minding their own business, so to speak, not involved in the happenings of the around the cordoned area. And the presiding officers and the electoral officers were conducting themselves very well. There was order. You go in there and you went through the various steps. There was order and there was peace. So that is what prevailed at the polling stations. There was transparency. The polling stations were open. They were not hidden in obscure places. And basically, that's the account that we give. There was order, there was transparency, there was peace at the polling stations.
Now, you said you have cited the Codeo report. Would you agree with me that everything you have said so far is contrary to that report? Would you agree?
Unfortunately, I have to say yes. I'll have to say yes. Because as I've maintained, there were no armed, masked men at the polling stations. our reports from the presiding officers at the prisons indicate that there was no alleged assault. There was no assault on the policeman. We have the contacts of the police officers who were there. We also have the report from the regional commander, who after his investigation has also provided us with a report saying that there was no assault on any policeman there. And, you know, there was peace in the polling stations.
So, if I get you right, you are putting on record that as far as security is concerned, the Ayawaso West Wogon constituency by-election was peaceful.
As far as the polling stations are concerned, we are well aware that, you know, there was violence erupted in the house of, you know, the candidate of the National Democratic Congress. But I'm saying that as far as the polling stations, the 137 polling stations are concerned, there was no violence there, and there was peace in the 137 polling stations. Of course, there was violence some 140 meters away from the polling station, and the gunshots could be heard in the neighborhood, including the area including the school. But what is interesting is that people around the area ran into the school where the polling station was, the cordoned area, to take cover. You know, so I'm sure that it was some sort of a peace haven for them. They ran there to take cover, although you could hear the gunshot wounds, but people ran there to take cover. And our presiding officer had to protect the environment and their equipment and materials. So it brought polling to a halt for about 45 minutes. But thereafter, the voting continued.
Very well. Correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm quoting you wrongly, please correct me. In answer to my question about the attack on the police officer at the prison's JHS, you said, and I'm not quoting you here, I'm only paraphrasing, that you have learned that there was some confusion. Am I right or wrong?
There was an argument.
An argument, yes. Very well.
Between the police officer
very well.
And staff of the national security.
Very well. My question is this. Have you subsequently found out what caused the said argument?
Yes, apparently it was about the sitting location. I think it was to do with the sitting positions of, you know, the officers. And that's what brought about the argument.
Now, there is also this allegation that the election security force on the day, personnel of the election security force of the day, were not properly trained. Has that come to your observation?
It hasn't. It hasn't, because when we went to the polling stations, we didn't observe, you know, any misconduct on the part of the police officers there. You know, it was not different from other elections that have been held. As I mentioned, they were seated quite far away from the cordoned area, and, you know, they were there minding their business. So you would find the policemen or policewomen in one area, and then the persons from the immigration also in one area, and then national security also, you know, in one area. So I haven't observed that there was a lack of, you know, proper training. As I informed you, we wrote to the regional commander to provide him with two options. Either he invites us to assist them with the briefing, or they do the briefing themselves. And we were not invited to do the briefing. But from the conduct of the security forces or the police personnel on that day, we didn't notice any conduct that showed that they were not properly briefed.
Now, do you have any other document you may want to tender to the commission? A report? Or the after situation report will come later, but if there is any other document, being it a report, a letter, whatever.
We would, I think we have the report from the presiding officers at the prisons, so we would also add that to the main.
Very well, so.
For the statement from them.
do you assure the commission that we are having copies this evening?
Yes, please.
Mr. Chairman, your witness.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mensah, for your testimony. A few questions to clarify. You indicated that you wrote to the police to provide security at the polling stations, gave them the number of polling stations and so on. Was there ever a meeting between the police and the EC at whatever level on the security arrangements?
Yes, there was an initial meeting between the regional director for the Greater Accra Electoral Commission. He engaged, had a meeting with the regional commander. It was after that that he followed up with, the list of the polling stations, to enable them to, the police to deploy, to know the exact locations and to allow them to deploy. And he engaged with him thereafter and followed up again with the second letter, informing the police of the importance of briefing, to provide briefing to their personnel.
Thank you. Did the EC, again at whatever level, receive briefing on police operational plans? Because you are in charge of elections, so you have to know how the police intend to do their work to support you. Was there any such briefing?
No. Once we provided them with the list, we didn't receive any detailed briefing from them as to how they were going to deploy.
Okay, thank you. So you had no way of knowing who they were bringing and what kind of coordination was in place for them to deal with the incidents?
No, they didn't provide us with a list of personnel that they were sending to each of the polling stations.
No, not a list, an operational plan, so
No,
that you have an idea of
us.
how many they were deploying and so on.
No.
Okay. Now, the presiding officers, they were supposed to be in charge of the police stations, right? So when I hear that there was an altercation between officers of two security agencies, then I want to know what was the role of the presiding officer in this matter. Because if the presiding officer is in charge, nobody should be arguing over who should sit where.
Yes, indeed. The presiding officer is supposed to be in charge, and I think they tried to, restore some normalcy and intervene. So I think they were able to do that. But, they were also busy, ensuring that, voting was taking place when this happened. But they were able to restore normalcy there.
I believe the EC has learned a lesson from this, that there are observers who will report what they see. And it may be blown out of proportion, it may not. So it's important at every material point that the EC presiding officer should be in charge of the station. But that will only happen if the EC is involved in the security arrangements. You said you offered your services for briefing to the police and they did not take you up on it. But did you know whether the police had any experience? I'm talking of those in charge. Had any experience of policing during elections?
Well, there's an election task force, and they normally are deployed during elections to oversee it. So we believe, or we assume, that they may have taken charge, because once I think usually what they ask of you is the polling stations details. Then they ask whether you have any flashpoint areas. And they do come back if they need additional information. And in this case, we supply them with those, and we believe, or we assume that the election task force should have taken over.
Does the EC have security experts on roll?
Within the commission?
Yes.
No.
Because you are in charge of an election. You know what an election requires. But if you outsource the security to somebody who does not know what is required, then you may have a gap.
I think that's why we engage with them. And usually we have extensive discussions with them. They would come in, then we would also go and engage where we feel that there are challenges and some areas to be looked at. We give them that appropriate briefing and provide them with information on what had happened in the past and why. And so we do have a research department that always has these reports on hand. And they provide, when they are giving the flashpoint areas, they indicate why, whether it's because of tribal conflicts, religious conflicts, whatever conflicts there are, whether it's political, because of the political interests. So our research department provides this sort of information.
Yes, I'm aware. I'm just suggesting that there's a security gap between the commission and those who provide the security in terms of operational planning. And so you assume that they will do their duty, but did they do their duty? That becomes a question you have to answer when really it was not up to you. So my advice is that in future there should be better coordination of the security with the EC. At all material times it must be understood that the EC is in charge. Because when a problem occurred at the station, the correct thing would have been for the officials to appeal to the presiding officer and not engage in an argument that would attract attention and form the report of observers, because that's what they saw. Thank you. You indicated that there was some shooting in a house at about 140 meters from the polling station, and that the residents took shelter at the polling station. Was there a report from the presiding officer about this incident?
Yes, please. There's a report. There's a statement.
There's a statement. Can we have a look?
Yes, please.
If you were told that the national security was undertaking an operation not related to the elections close to a polling station, what advice would you give national security?
Well, we give them the advice that it's the police that is in charge. They are the agency that the commission deals with. They have the election task force. And so they have the history and the experience when it comes to managing security on election day. And therefore, if there's an incident that they are dealing with, it's the police that have to be called in. Because if you notice, even at the polling stations, none of the policemen were armed. And so I believe they've done this for many, many years, and they know how to, approach it. So the advice I would give is that it should be left to the police who have the experience and who have the history of managing elections.
But if it wasn't at the polling station at all, then this advice wouldn't be the appropriate advice.
Yes, indeed, because but of course it's on election day. You cannot guarantee whether it's an election-related violence or not. So I believe the nature of the incident will determine what there's not the type of personnel to take there. But if it relates to the election, then it would be, even if it was outside the polling station, but relates to an election, maybe the police would be the best people to handle it.
Yeah, I was hoping you would advise national security that election day is election day. And so if they have an operation that can wait, that it would have been better to wait than to confuse situations and intimidate the public. Because if people plan to come and vote and they hear there's shooting at the polling station or near the polling station, they aren't going to come. If they come and they see people dressed aggressively as if they are going to battle, they aren't going to vote. So perhaps in your future interaction with the security agencies, you might want to appeal to them to exercise discretion in these matters so that the public doesn't get intimidated. Anybody could have been killed for just going to vote, because we know how stray bullets sometimes hit people. And so that's my general advice to you. Thank you.
Hello. Mrs. Mensah, you are aware that normally, as you said, for the elections, there is a national and regional and even district security plan. And in fact, the task forces, the national, regional, and district security task forces have representatives of the Electoral Commission on them. And therefore, for this particular one, your people in Accra were not invited or did not participate in any formal meeting of the regional election security task. Should we therefore presume that the regional elections was not activated?
I believe that if it was, we would have been
on it.
informed.
Yes. And apart from the formal activation of the regional election task force, there was also no formal meeting between the regional police command and the regional officers of the Electoral Commission, at least just to reconcile their operational plans to see where there are areas of assistance. As you said, you even offered assistance. There was no formal meeting like that.
No, not after we had provided them with the details. They didn't contact us.
Now, a lot of people have tried to link the violence at the house about 140 meters away. And a lot of people have also tried to delink it. Let's see whether we can come to some compromise. According to your presiding officer's report, something started. We heard, maybe later, that some security people were dealing with some attacks that were alleged to be coming to disturb the election. At the beginning, your elections were still going on, your processes were going on. Then later on, the presiding officer says there were some shots, they had some shots. And later on, he or she, is it a he or a she? Mr. Clifford, yes, he says that they saw somebody being carried from the house after the shooting. And then people started running to your polling station, as you said, for cover. Then they had to stop the elections for about 45 minutes before later on, when calm was restored, the elections restarted. So would you then say that the violence at somebody's house affected the smooth conduct of the elections for some period?
Yes, as far as the La Bawaleshi polling station was concerned, it affected it for close to 45 minutes because voting there came to a standstill.
Yes.
I also believe that the the gunshots and so on, and the stories carried out would have an effect on that police
yes,
station in particular.
could frighten some people.
Would frighten people from coming there.
Okay. Now, also, normally, when they have the coordinating meetings with the security task force, they know, the Electoral Commission, I mean, would know many security agencies will be involved in various parts of the country. In the past, we would all know that we'd have the police, the, as you say, immigration, prisons, fire, sometimes customs. There were even periods when NADMO. And then in some regions, we even had boys' brigade, girls' brigade. And so if national security was going to be part of the security arrangements, you should have been informed. I mean, the Electoral Commission should have been informed.
Yes, please.
And so when you heard that there were at some polling stations, were you not surprised?
Well, what had transpired was that when it comes to the printing of ballots, the Electoral Commission informs both the police and the BNI because of the security implications. So usually, both are written to provide them with updates of the printing, the various printing houses and so on. And so that because both the security and the political parties police it, so that is the extent to which we involve them. But usually it is the police, like you're saying, for main elections, they would inform us of the various agencies that would be, monitoring, or that would be at the polling station. In this case, we were not given that information.
Madam, that's an interesting development. You are saying that for printing the ballot papers, you would write to BNI, National Security. Because what I know is that in the past, the National Election Security Task Force would coordinate with your group, and they are in charge of all this. And they would have a unit under the National Election Security Task Force to coordinate with your people, and they will supervise the printing of the. It's not a sole responsibility for national security or for BNI. That group or unit may well have somebody from BNI on it, but it is not, or it has not been the practice that your outfit would write to national security and to the BNI that we are going to print ballot papers, so please come and supervise. So maybe we could go back to the original arrangement. And the parties were also always notified, and they will have their representatives at the places where the printing was being done. Sometimes 2, 3, 4 days, all of them, your staff, national security, National Elections Task Force, and political party reps, they won't go out. They will be there eating together, drinking together, drinking water together for the 2 or 3 days. So please, don't let us create a new structure that shows that only national security and BNI would.
No, maybe I'll have to correct it. But what we do is to write to the police and to the BNI, not national security. And I recall that I was informed this had been the practice for years. So in the case of the recent referendum, when it came to the printing of the ballots, both the police and the BNI were written to. And of course, all the political parties and the staff of the EC were also informed. Yes, please.
And I'm saying that don't let us create a new structure, because if the BNI were going to be part of any security task force, it would come from the national or the regional. But it shouldn't be from your outfit to write to them that they should come and police unless, of course, we've started a new thing. I don't know about that. Unless you want to create a new, because once you write to the BNI, they are the national security. They will inform their bosses, and then you have this problem. The national security will think that once you've written to us, we have to come in as part of the security at the polling stations. So all of us, maybe we should learn lessons from it and then try and keep the old structures that do not allow any other groups or agencies apart from the elections security task forces to be in charge. Thank you so much.
Ms. Mensah, were you provided with the Kodio report?
Yes, please.
Do you have a copy here?
No.
Okay. You said that there were national security operatives at the polling stations?
Yes, at some polling stations.
How many?
Usually you would find one or two, wearing a T-shirt, but at the badge that said NSC.
They were not, you insist they were not armed?
They were not armed. They were in plain T-shirts and were not dressed in uniform, actually. I think it was like more of a gray T-shirt, but they were not armed.
Now, you also said that gunshots were heard from the polling station, the A.W.W polling station. Did your presiding officer indicate how many gunshots were heard?
No, he didn't, but we can find out from him.
Okay. And there also in the report that the presiding officer filed, he said that they saw a man being carried with gunshot wounds from the same direction, that is the house adjacent to the polling station. Were you able to ascertain how that person sustained those gunshots? In other words, who fired those, how that person received those gunshots, whether it was from the, in other words, were you able to ascertain that?
No, please. He didn't provide us with the information, but he just indicated that he saw them carrying him, from the location, from the house.
Okay. All right, I think we would like to thank you for your testimony, and you promised to provide us with certain reports, so we hope to get them, you said, by the end of the day. Okay, thank you very much for your testimony.